Zack Polanski, thanks for joining me. You are deputy leader of the Green Party at the moment. Why do you want to be leader?
I want to be leader of the Green Party because this is a huge moment for the country and for the party. We had 14 years of conservative austerity that has absolutely broken the country, and people voted for change. And the Labour Party is not offering any meaningful change. In fact, on so many issues that really matter to people, things are getting much worse, from the winter fuel payments, to the genocide in Gaza, to the two-child benefit cap. And what the Green Party are offering is essentially a real hope and real change. But what we really need is bold leadership. Far too many people don't know about the Green Party. They don't know about our policies. They think we just care about the environment. The environment is really important to me, but there's no environmental justice without social, racial and economic justice. We need to be talking about the cost of living and the mass inequality in our society. I want to show that leadership, and I want to take the party to the next level.
Yeah, you've sort of led me on to my next question, which is, at the general election, you did similar. You got a similar amount of seats to the Reform Party, and it feels like since the general election, they've skyrocketed, where you guys have sort of stayed stagnant. What's gone wrong?
Nigel Farage tells a really powerful story, but so often it is based in disinformation and lies. It's a bit like he's playing politics in easy mode. He just gets to hit with people's emotions. I do think we've got to learn from that, not with the same politics, I despise his politics, but with the storytelling. It's just our storytelling needs to be based in facts and information, and that's really difficult, but transforming this country was never meant to be easy.
What do you offer that's different to the current leadership?
I think I'm offering bold leadership, so being really clear about exactly what we stand for and being really clear about what we stand against. I also don't want to be focused too much on Westminster. It's really important we get future MPs, and I want to see a whole new cohort of MPs. But ultimately, I want to focus on communities. I want to focus on workers. I want to take the energy that's in those communities and send that new block of people to Westminster. I don't think that comes from being inside a broken system. I think that comes from being out and about all around the country, as I have been for years and will continue as leader.
Do you think them lot in there have failed?
No, I don't think they failed. I think they're doing a really, really solid job. But also with the crises that we're facing, both the inequality crisis, the racist riots in our streets, the nature and climate crisis, we need to accelerate our change. We need to be so much bolder about what we are offering. And I don't think you can do that when you're focusing on your day job in there. And in fact, I really agree with Carla Denyer when she stepped down as leader to say she wants to focus on her constituents. We need 4 solid MPs who can focus on their constituents, and I'll lead the movement and be a co-leader essentially with one of the MPs who's head of parliament.
You don't really think that the system of having co-leaders works, right?
I think job sharing is really, really important, and it's something I absolutely support, but ultimately I do think the movement needs a single figurehead, and that's not just about it being about me, but that's about someone who can go all around the country and amplify other people's voices. I think about some of our councillors who are doing amazing work that the media don't know about them, and so I do think we need someone at the top of the party that's a recognisable face who can go around and lift up the voices and the work of other people.
Since the departure of Jeremy Corbyn, it sort of feels like there's been a power vacuum in the left of British politics. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that is true. I think people are really looking for an alternative right now. And I would say to anyone who hasn't joined the Green Party yet, if you join before July 31st, you get a vote in this leadership election. And I want to see anyone who aligns with our values join under this umbrella. We're a broad church party, but it's very clear what we stand for. We have a country where poor people are getting poorer and rich people are getting richer. The Green Party want to challenge that inequality and the climate crisis by offering bold, hopeful change, and that's what you can do when you join the Green Party.
You've talked about it a bit, but you've been calling for eco-populism. What is that?
So the climate crisis is one of the biggest crises facing us, but if you're someone who's living in a housing estate or you just don't have a lot of money, it's really hard to focus on anything but getting food on your plate, heat in your home, and looking after your family. Now, we know all of these things are linked to the climate crisis because the climate crisis are going to hit the poorest communities harder than anyone else. But when you're facing these challenges, I don't think you're sometimes ready to hear that. And actually, if you can change people's material conditions, and challenging the climate crisis does that, lowers people's bills, it cleans up our water, it stops water companies pumping sewage into our waters and then charging us extra for the privilege. Eco-populism is about telling a real story about what's happening in our world that really meets people's everyday needs.
We've already got someone in there who many people would describe as a populist. Would you say you're the left-wing Nigel Farage?
No, I think I reject kind of any comparison to Nigel Farage. I think what we really need is not kind of demagogue figures or cults of personality. What we actually need is mass movements. And so with Nigel Farage, it's a one-man party. We know when he goes, the whole thing looks like it's going to struggle. But actually in the Green Party, we've had years of sustained growth, which I really support. What I'm really arguing for here is that we need to accelerate that growth. And one person can't do that, and they shouldn't do that. But what one person can do is facilitate a movement to get much bigger, much louder, and much more effective.
On to policies. Can you tell our viewers what some specific policies would be that you'd campaign for if you became leader? Because like you mentioned, it can't just be protecting the planet.
Absolutely. At the centre of everything is a wealth tax. We know that for decades now, but particularly during the pandemic, while people were really struggling, multimillionaires and billionaires were making more money than ever before. Right now, we tax earned wealth more than unearned wealth. Earned income more than unearned wealth. So to give you an example, I met some South American cleaners recently who are cleaning a building. And in the afternoon, I met a patriotic millionaire, someone who's very wealthy, who's saying, tax me more. He was saying the cleaners could be paying more tax for cleaning that building than the person who owns that building. That's completely unfair, and it's fixable. If we brought income tax in line with corporation tax, for instance, what we would be doing there is making sure we're taxing unearned wealth as much as earned income. I think it's changing the tax system like that with lots of other areas like land value tax that would make a fair taxation system. Now, all of those things can be really, really complicated, but I think an easier way to say it is to tax for rich, and let's get the taxation system right.
This one is a bit of a tricky area for the Green Party. What would you do about the nuclear deterrent if you were Green Party leader?
I don't think it is a tricky question, actually, because I want to see us defended and I want to see real security. But we can't have real security while veterans are sleeping homeless on the streets. We can't have real security when inequality is so bad in this country that people are homeless and they are struggling. What real security looks like is investing in this country to be ultimately a regional power, rather than the obsession about global powers. To hear Keir Starmer say that the real deterrent to war is to prepare for war makes absolutely no sense at all. I think to lots of people this looks like scaremongering to ultimately move money from public wealth to private capital, and particularly the arms companies. I'm not a pacifist. Of course we should defend our country, but we should do it sensibly and based on fact, and not at a time when we can't afford books in schools apparently, but we can afford bombs in foreign wars.
And you said a few weeks or months ago that you think vegan school meals should be the default. Do you really believe that?
Well, it's more nuanced than that. What I was arguing was in cafes that are owned by city authorities, you could make the vegan food the default on the menu. So it's the first thing on the menu, it has the biggest font, and it's the thing that people are encouraged to eat. That means if someone wants meat or dairy, that is still on the menu. It's not about taking anyone's choice, but it's recognizing that the plant-based option is the option that is frequently the most nutritious and the cheapest for the authority. And so ultimately, if we're looking to tackle the climate crisis and bring bills down in the cost of living crisis, encouraging people to move towards plant-based food while still giving them other options seems like a sensible idea to most people.
And another slightly controversial thing you said was that you think the UK should leave NATO.
Well, I didn't quite say that. So what I said is that Donald Trump is threatening to annex Greenland. That means under NATO rules that would trigger Article 5, which means we would be at a world war. Now, someone could either say that they don't believe Donald Trump, in which case I would challenge the premise that we're in a nuclear alliance with someone that we don't believe, who is threatening to annex one of our allies, or he is really looking for a world war. So what I'm arguing is that we need to work with our closest allies, people in Europe, for instance, and look at alternative alliances based on peace and based on diplomacy, and also negotiate with our enemies. Now that can sound controversial, but by the way, those aren't my words. Those are the words of Jonathan Powell, someone who is a national security advisor to Tony Blair. He's saying that under Nelson Mandela, he negotiated with the ANC. During the Troubles, we negotiated across Irish borders. Ultimately, you have to talk to people and you have to create diplomacy. But right now under NATO, Donald Trump holds so many of the cards, to use his words, and ultimately he's acting very unpredictably. We cannot rely on our national security on Donald Trump. We need to renegotiate and look at that special relationship and look to Europe for much better alliances.
A couple more policy ones. The London mayor has been calling for the decriminalisation of cannabis. What would your stance on that be?
We absolutely need to decriminalise cannabis, and we would go further in the Green Party. We want to see drugs legalised and regulated. We know the war on drugs has failed. And crucially, the Metropolitan Police stop and search young black men 6 times more often for cannabis, despite the fact that the London Drugs Commission that just came out showed there is no difference between a young white man and a young black man in their possession of cannabis. This is racial discrimination. It's policy that is running throughout the Metropolitan Police. And ultimately, by reforming our drug laws, that's one way we could reduce this injustice.
What do you say to people who say it's a gateway drug and bad for your mental health?
Well, I think there's lots of things that are gateway drugs. You could argue about that with alcohol and cigarettes. And ultimately, I think the best thing, rather than banning things, is to educate people and give people public information. I see the role of the mayor and ultimately the government to be able to have these conversations. It's not just cannabis, by the way. There are drug testing centres in places like Glasgow. This is recognizing that if young people in particular go to festivals, a lot of them are likely to take drugs no matter what you say. Now, isn't it better that the drugs are being tested so people know exactly what they're taking and they're safe, rather than we'll pretend that's not happening and drive people into a black market where they're taking unsafe substances?
And I asked one of your co-leaders about this and he didn't really provide an answer, so I'm hoping you will. What is your position on the monarchy?
Well, bold leadership requires being bold and being clear about our policy. I would abolish the monarchy, and that's not, by the way, because I hate the royals, it's because I believe in democracy. And ultimately, a time of mass inequality, when people see what is happening, I think it just seems odd, and people would argue that it's symbolism, but I think the symbolism of having a very, very wealthy group of people be able to interfere in laws, as we know has happened, or use their platform in inappropriate ways, then I think that sticks in the throats of most people. Now, I know some people would argue that King Charles is a mass environmentalist. I'd encourage anyone to speak up about the environment, but I don't think you need to be living in Buckingham Palace to do that.
My final question, I have to ask you about this. When we Google you, does it take long to find articles that talk about you being a hypnotherapist that could enlarge women's breasts? What's that all about?
Well, I think Tony Benn answers this best when he says, I don't care where you've come from, I care where you're going. I made a mistake. We are all more than one mistake, and I apologized at the time. What I hope people will focus is the fact that I'm challenging multimillionaire and billionaire wealth. And when the media, not you, but some of the media, keep challenging me about that and keep trying to silence the Green Party when we're challenging inequality, I think people start to ask, where are those questions coming from and why?